Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to continue to solve linear equations using the addition property of equality. In particular, though, we're going to use the distributive property. So in these equations that we're going to look at, we're going to have parentheses that are going to be involved. So the first thing you want to do is to remove the parentheses by using the distributive property. Now, we talked about the distributive property in a previous lesson. All right, so let's look at this example. So the directions will say solve each equation. And these are linear equations, so the idea is to bring the variables one side, constants to the other. Okay, so number one, suppose we had, let's say 3 times x plus 4 is equal to, let's say, 2x minus 1. All right, so 3 times x plus 4 is equal to 2x minus 1. Okay, so notice there is a set of parentheses here. And notice when you read this reads as 3 times and then x plus 4. Okay, so in a previous lesson, remember when you talked about the distributive property, so in a previous lesson when you had, let's say, negative 2 times 3x minus 1, and you want to get rid of the parentheses, so basically what you did was you distributed negative 2. So every term inside the parentheses was multiplied by negative 2. So negative 2 times 3x is a negative 6x, and then a negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 2. And then you combine like terms if you could. Okay? So that's what we're going to use here. So the first thing you want to do is always use the distributive property first if you can. Okay? So we're going to do the distributive property. All right, remember, do one thing at a time. So what I'm looking for when I grade your work is to see if you're doing one step at a time and it's mathematically correct. Okay, it has to be mathematically correct. Okay, so 3 times x is 3x, and then 3 times a positive 4 is a positive 12, equal 2x minus 1. All right, so the first step was to use the distributive property. Okay, now this looks like the previous lesson. So notice I have variables both sides, constants on both sides. So let's deal with the variables first. So it does not matter which side you bring the variables on. You can bring them to the right side or you can bring them to the left side. But remember, we haven't talked about the multiplication property of equality. So if you bring the variables to the right side, you're going to end up with a negative 1x. Now, we talked about that in one of the problems, but let's avoid that for right now. Okay, so let's just think of it this way. The coefficient of this term right here is 3. The coefficient of this term is 2. Since 3 is larger than 2, let's bring the variables to the left-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2x from both sides. So notice how it looks. You got to say subtract 2x, subtract 2x. And notice I'm aligning my like terms. All right. So what I used here was the addition property of equality. All right, addition property of equality. Now what I used to go from here to here was the distributive property. So notice the steps as you go through this. So I got rid of the parentheses, your distributive property. Then if you could have, you would have combined like terms, which each side the terms were different. And then I'm going to use the addition property of equality. Now I'm going to combine like terms. So I'm going to combine like terms. All right, now when I combine like terms, 3x minus 2x is x, and then plus 12 equal, and 2x and a negative 2x is 0. 0 and a negative 1 is a negative 1. Okay, now to get the variable x by itself, right now I'm adding 12. The opposite of adding 12 is to subtract 12. So again, I'm using the addition property of equality. Addition property of equality. So notice how things alternate. Addition property of equality, combine like terms, addition property of equality, and then I'm combining like terms. 12 and a negative 12 is 0, x plus 0 is x, and then a negative 1 and a negative 12 is a negative 13. All right, so to get this answer here, I just combine like terms. All right, now on the worksheet or on the test, you don't write these down. You're not going to have time on the test to write these down. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this process. So this is your solution process. This is your solving process. Okay, so that's a process you go through. Notice you did one thing at a time. One thing at a time. That's the way I want it to look. Okay, number 2. All right, number 2, suppose you had, let's say, 2 times, let's say 3 times n minus 5 minus, in parentheses, 6 minus 2n is equal to 4n. All right, now notice there are 2 sets of parentheses. 2 sets of parentheses. And you dealt in a previous lesson when you were dealing with simplifying expressions. Now notice this is an equation because it has an equal sign, but if that equation wasn't there, you had this kind of situation in a previous lesson. So remember though, this part's easy right here because you can distribute the 3. Okay? Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. If I cover this part up here, like we've talked about before, see this right here? I'm going to go ahead and write it right here. Now remember, if there's no number there, there's coefficients not there, it's supposed to be a 1, so this is a -1. So if you need to, go ahead and rewrite it like that. Okay? And then you can distribute that -1. So you're going to say -1 times 6 is a -6, and a -1 times a -2n is a positive 2n. A negative times a negative is a positive. So this right here, when you distribute that -1 through here, which is what this is, you're going to end up getting, all right, let's fix this right here. So that's going to be 3n, 3 times a -5 is a -15, and then that is this. So -6 plus 2n equals 4n. Okay? So I used a distributive property. So I did the distributive property, and I got this. Okay, now I'm going to combine like terms. So when I combine like terms next, because you have terms that are like here on this side. So 3n and 2n is 5n. Okay? Now your constant, a -15 and a -6. That's a -15, that's a -6. So a -15 plus a -6, if you don't remember your sign numbers, use your calculator, is a -21. And so that's going to equal 4n. All right, so what I did here was I combined like terms. That's how I got this. I combined like terms. Okay, so I used the distributive property. So to go from here to here, I did the distributive property. Okay, and then once I did the distributive property, I got this step and I combined like terms. So that's how I got this. Okay, now notice there are variables on both sides. All right, variables on both sides. Now, let's go ahead and just keep talking about, or keep doing this the way we talked about earlier. So notice I have variables on both sides. The constant's just on one side. Okay? So since we haven't talked about the multiplication property of equality, let's just keep discussing about if this is a 5 coefficient and this coefficient is 4. Since 5 is larger, we're going to bring the variables to the left side. So let's continue talking about that. So to get rid of this 4n, since that's a positive 4n, I'm going to subtract 4n from both sides. Okay, no big deal. It's not that difficult. So notice I'm using the addition property of equality. Addition property of equality. And now I want to combine like terms. 5n minus 4n is n minus 21 equal, now remember that when I combine these, that's 0. So that's equal to 0. All right, so it was a 0. All right, so to get to this step right here, to get to this, the way I got to this was I combined like terms. That's how I got this. All right, now notice, all I got to do is one more thing and I'm done. So notice I've got to solve for n. Since I'm subtracting 21, the opposite of subtracting 21 is to add 21. So I'm going to add 21 to both sides. So when I, again right here, I'm using the addition property of equality. Again, you don't have to write all this. I'm writing this just to remind you what's happening at each step. All right, then I'm going to combine like terms. So a negative 21 or positive 21 is 0, n plus 0 is n, and then 0 plus 21 is 21. All right, so to get to that point, I combine like terms. All right, combine like terms. And there's your solution. This is your solution. All right. Okay, now let's look at this example. Number 4, oops, sorry, number 3. All right, number 3, suppose we had negative 2 times x plus 6 plus 3 times 2x minus 5 equals 3 times x minus 4 plus 10. Suppose we have that. Okay, so notice I have 3 sets of parentheses. 3 sets of parentheses. So remember, the first thing you want to do, since I have parentheses, first thing you want to do is use the distributive property to get rid of the parentheses. Use the distributive property. Okay, so to go from here to here, I'm going to do the distributive properties. First thing you want to do, distributive property. Okay, so negative 2 times x and negative 2 times 6. So negative 2 times x is a negative 2x. A negative 2 times 6, a positive 6, is a negative 12. Okay, so that right here is this. All right, now here I'm going to distribute the 3. Positive 3 times positive 2x is a positive 6x. A positive 3 times a negative 5 is a negative 15. Okay, so this right here are these two terms. Equal. 3 times x is 3x, and then 3 times a negative 4 is a negative 12. So that right here is this. And don't forget you're adding 10, so bring down the plus 10. All right, so that's where I'm at. So to go from this step to this step, I use a distributive property. Now notice what you're going to do next. So notice that on this side you can combine like terms. So the next step is to combine like terms. So let's deal with the variables first. So a negative 2x and a positive 6x is 4x. A negative 12 and a negative 15 is a negative 27. Equal. And the only terms I can combine here are these constants. So remember that there's no variable in the term, they're called constants. So a negative 12 and a positive 10 is a negative 2. If you don't remember your signed numbers, don't mess up, just use your calculator. Negative 12 plus 10 is a negative 2. So this becomes 3x minus 2. All right, so to go from this step to this step, I just combine like terms. Okay, now notice I have variables both sides, constants on the other. Let's deal with the variable terms first. Since this is a positive 4, and since this is 3. Now, once we get into the multiplication property of equality, it's not really going to matter which side you bring this on, because if I were to bring this 4x to the other side, to the right side, I'd end up with a negative 1x. But then, when we talk about the multiplication property of equality, you'll know what to do with that. But since we haven't really talked about that yet, let's just continue doing it the way we were doing the other problems. Since this is a positive 4, and since this is a positive 3, and since 4 is larger than 3, let's bring the variable terms to the left-hand side. So since that's a positive 3x, I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. Notice one thing at a time. So when using the addition property of equality, do one thing at a time. All right, so notice I'm using the addition property of equality right here. Addition property of equality. Okay? And now I'm going to combine like terms. 4x minus 3x is x minus 27 equal 3x minus 3x is 0. 0 and a negative 2 is a negative 2. All right, so to get to that point right here, I combine like terms. That's what I did. So notice the alternating steps. Distributive property, combine like terms. Addition property of equality, combine like terms. And then notice I'm going to use the addition property of equality again, because to get the variable x by itself, I've got to get rid of this negative 27. So this means that to the variable x, I'm subtracting 27. The opposite of subtracting 27 is to add 27 to both sides. So notice do it on each side. You got to show both of those, plus 27, plus 27. So that's the addition property of equality that I'm using. Okay, and now I'm going to combine like terms. A negative 27 and a positive 27 is 0. X and 0 is x, equal. A negative 2 and a positive 27. If you don't remember your sign numbers, use your calculator. But when you do, you're going to get a positive 25. And so to get from here to here, I combine like terms. Okay, so notice the alternating process we go through. And notice that once I did distributive property, when using the addition property of equality, I did one step at a time. subtract 3x from both sides, add 27 from both sides. Okay, so that process, this solution process right here, when finding the solution, is what I need to see. Okay, number 4. All right, number 4, suppose you had, let's say, 10 minus 2x minus 4 equals 7 minus 3x. So 10 minus 2x minus 4 equal 7 minus 3x. All right, now be a little bit careful with this. So see this 10 right here. If I cover this 10 up, see this right here kind of looks like we had this problem. Remember this problem where we had this and we had covered this expression? Okay, and then we went off to the side and we discussed it. So that's what you want to do here. So you want to be strategic. You want to be very careful with what you do. So I'm going to cover this term 10 up, and then you see this right here. This is what we have. And remember, I got to get rid of the parentheses right here. So to get rid of that parentheses, remember that right here is understood to be a 1, so that's a -1. Okay, and then we distribute. So -1 times 2x is a -2x. A -1 times a -4 is a +4. So that is what belongs here. Okay, so here's what we get. We get 10. And then this right here is this. So that's minus 2x plus 4 equal 7 minus 3x. Okay? All right, so that's what we get. All right, now, so what I did to go from here to here was I used distributive property. Okay, distributive property. Okay, now I'm going to combine like terms because on this left side and on the right side, these two are not alike. So I can't combine like terms on the right side, but I can on the left. So once you do distributive property, you need to check and see if you can combine like terms. That's the next thing you need to do, combine like terms. You got to be strategic and very careful as you do this. So once you do distributive property, combine like terms. It makes things a whole lot easier for you. Your chances of messing up diminishes quite a bit. So 10 plus 4 is 14. So these constants, remember these are constants, so when I add these constants I get 14. I'm going to go ahead and put the -2x first. So I get -2x plus 14 equal 7 minus 3x. Okay? All right, now notice I have variables on both sides, constants on both sides. So let's talk about the variables first. The coefficient here is a -2. The coefficient here is a -3. Since -2 is larger than -3, I'm going to bring the variable terms to the left-hand side. So since I'm subtracting 3x, the opposite of subtracting 3x is to add 3x. So I'm going to add 3x to both sides, just like this. One thing at a time. All right, and so notice this right here. What I'm doing right here is using the addition property of equality. That's what I'm using. Addition property of equality. All right, now I'm going to combine like terms. A -2x and a +3x is x. -2 plus 3 is 1, so that's just x. Plus 14 equal, when I combine like terms here, -3x and a +3x, they're opposites of each other. We talked about opposites before. When you add two terms that are opposites, you get 0. So that's 0. 7 plus 0 is 7. So that's where I'm at. Okay, so notice that to go from here to here, since I have parentheses, you want to use distributive property first. And then the next thing you want to do when you have the distributive property is combine like terms if you can, and I can here. So to go from here to here, I combine like terms. That's how I got that. Combine like terms. And then next thing you do is addition property of equality. So I'm going to add 3x to both sides. And now I'm here. So one more step and you're basically done. So notice to get the variable x by itself, I've got to get rid of this plus 14. So right now I'm adding 14 to x. The opposite of adding 14 is to subtract 14. Just like this. So notice I'm using the addition property of equality. Oh, and right here, remember to go from here to here, I combine like terms. So notice the alternating process. So now I'm using the addition property of equality again. Okay, now I'm going to combine like terms again. So notice the alternating process. Positive 14, negative 14 is 0. X plus 0 is x. equal 7 and a positive 7 and negative 14. Use your calculator. Don't do this in your head if you're having difficulty with sign numbers. Use your calculator. 7 negative 14 is a negative 7. And again, to go from here to here, I'll combine like terms. Okay? All right, so that should be enough examples to get you through the problems dealing with parentheses. So notice, use this as a guide. And notice when you do the assignments, knows a process. So we did the distributive property. We combine like terms. That's the next thing you want to do if you need, if you can. Then notice you're going to do the addition property equality one step at a time. Okay, one step at a time. That's what I need to see. One step at a time. And then combine like terms, and then addition property equality again, one step at a time, and then combine like terms, and you're done. That's how I want it to look, just like this. Okay, so that's going to take care of this lesson.